Every coach, every consultant, every agency owner is telling you to run more ads, send more volume, push more posts, add 3 times a day now on LinkedIn as well, optimize the funnel, give away a free PDF. And honestly, I've heard probably all of it. And I've also learned it very differently. So I've spent about 7.5 years in finance, top producer, broke firm records that stood for over 65 years. I've overseen north of $55 million in assets. And from that seat, I've watched who actually keeps the money and who doesn't. And I've watched great women make great revenue while quietly, completely drowning in it, crying in their car, feeling that their life is over. And revenue is vanity. The women who kept the money were built differently from a perspective of underneath it all. So now I get to do that for women in business, plus a whole set of additional tools that most coaches never actually touch. And so I'm going to give you all 4 of these shifts, but most people operate on like 1, maybe 2. So the one that changes everything is probably the one that nobody's actually talking about. So let's dive into it. In the declaration shift, this is our first lever. The price comes to you as a number and it lands. And this is not something that is necessarily for you with a client. This is for you with yourself before they even walk into the room, before you even know that they actually have an opportunity to sit down with you. Okay. Because when the price actually comes to you as a number, you feel it in your gut. And then almost immediately afterwards, you soften it and you try to walk it back. You round it down, or you say, like, let's have a on ramp where the first month is this, and then we'll go to why. And you tell yourself that you're making it accessible, and you tell yourself that good people do this, that this is what good people do. This is generosity. And you tell yourself that people don't lead with the price tag. They build relationships and they get to know one another. And then you say a lower number and you feel relief because you feel like there's this relief, but really what it's dressed up as is generosity. And so old money doesn't do this. And I want you to, old money does do generosity, but they do it in a completely different way. Old money doesn't negotiate. Okay, let's say it that way. It's a declaration. It's not a request, because a request can be denied. A request can be a discount. A declaration, though, stands in a very, very different way. And so if you're finding that there's like a secondary negotiation happening under the table where you're sitting at, I want you to think about if you're being nice or if you are just trying to close somebody, and at what cost is that? Because most women that I work with have never actually made a pricing declaration in their entire career. They've made suggestions, they've made adjustments, they've made pricing hopes even, and they're pricing these offers with a question mark at the end. And then they wonder why a client is treating it like an opening bid. And so I want us to understand that the reason a lot of times that the framework is a little bit off is because when you, how do we say it this way? Next time you set a price, say the number and fully stop. Let it completely sit alone in its room. Let it do its job. Let it, in that sense. Absolutely. Okay. But notice the urge that happens behind this. Okay. And I want to clarify, that's not generosity. That is something that is dressing up fear in some sort of cute accessories that nobody ever wanted. Okay. So recognize what it is, what it looks like, and then let it pass, because it's understanding that when you negotiate that, you're removing a load-bearing wall and hoping that the ceiling stays up inside of the business. And that's not fair to you, because who does it actually work for? It works for the person on the other side who was looking for a deal and thinks that she got a deal, but really you're waiting for resentment. And the other thing that I want to say is any woman who has said a number out loud and immediately wanted to take it back, she knows who she is and she knows how painful that is. And so if that is you, maybe think about this. If it's not you, this video isn't for you. You can totally swipe off of it. The next piece is doing a generosity audit, actually. So generosity is kind of like underpricing, but with really cute PR, where basically the idea of that makes a lot of people really uncomfortable with even me just saying, because people will say, well, no, generosity needs to be in the world because we need to make the world a better place. And from the inside, yeah, I totally get that. It makes the world feel like it's like you care about your clients, like you want to make things accessible. But you don't want to be one of those people who talks about money and only talks about money. So what happens is you round down and then you over deliver and then you absorb the gap that's in between. And then you build up all this resentment and frustration and you call it service. And from the outside, it looks like this. And a woman who is making 25K a month or 40K a month, but only keeping 4 grand of it that's a problem. That is not a functioning business. So your calendar is full and your margins are basically empty. And she oftentimes can't name a reason except that she works really, really hard and cares very, very deep. And somehow it never adds. And so the math here is not something that'll ever lie to you. It'll never be mysterious. It'll never be cloaked in something strange. And the drive is the only thing that's actually holding the business up. So here's the audit, and it's very, very simply 3 questions. 1, what's the first number that comes to you? Not something that somebody said, the one that you've thought of before and softened it, adjusted, exited it. I don't know. And then 2, what number did you actually say out loud? There's a difference a lot of times. The number that came to us versus the number that you would think that this travel space is not that long, but it actually is pretty long. Write down the number that you actually have set out. The gap between those two, it's not generosity. The gap is a price of your discomfort. And you've paid it so that you don't have to feel the things that you feel when you say the real number. And so now I want you to look at that gap and say, okay, what does that cost you this year? We're about 6 months through at the time of me videoing that. And so I want you to do the math and I want you to understand what is the multiplier of that. Multiply that gap by the number of your clients. And that number is what your fear is actually charging you actively. It's kind of like when you have a balance on a credit and you're just not paying it off. You're just kind of like looking at it. It is charging you. It's compounding you constant. And so is the fear. It's compounding inside of your business. You know, when I was in finance, I watched this happen all the time. I've watched women with more talent, more drive, more quality benefits and more capacity than anybody else in the room, and still have this area where she's earning less. Wasn't fair, wasn't right. And then she's looking at men who've done half the work, and she's not looking at them because she did worse than them or they did worse than, but because she apologized for a price and no one ever asked them to do. And so we write up this whole story in our mind around the fact that, like, oh my gosh, but I'm generous and I connect with my clients and I do all these things. And then you get a lawsuit and it changes the way that your brain frame is forever. And you basically are saying to yourself, you know what? Actually, I am going to charge what I am willing to charge, because it is not, if I want to give something away, I'll give it away. And that's generosity. But let's be clear about what generosity actually is. Don't charge less than the thing costs to build and then call it virtue, because that's not virtual. That's a structural failure for yourself, that your own body is actually, in your own time and your own sanity and your relationship and your strain and your thoughts at night that haunt you and think about like how much you quote unquote gave some. Who does that work for you? Nope. Any woman whose revenue looks impressive but whose profit is invisible needs to take a look at that. Right. Yes, I did the pointing finger. I did not do it as cute though as our girl, but we'll talk about that. I spent 7.5 years in finance, and I've watched a lot of capital move, and I've watched businesses scale, and I've watched them collapse. And the ones that collapsed, I oftentimes didn't fail because the owner wasn't working hard. They failed because the thing that they were doing couldn't actually hold the weight in a lot of ways. And so price is infrastructure, but it's supposed to carry 3 different things. It's supposed to carry your overhead, your profit margin, and your apps. So if your price cannot carry all 3, then you've become the load-bearing wall and so you fill in the gap with all of these hours, and you own that energy. And I get that. You own your drive, and your drive is an excellent short-term material with a terrible long-term one, because our energy tends to get less and less available, right? It fatigues, it needs rest. It doesn't actually get it oftentimes though, because the structure is depending on it all the time, 24/7. So you're just tired 24/7. And so most women that I know are running a business where the price carries the first thing and then maybe part of the second thing, but it never, ever, ever carries the third. And so your absence is not accounted for anywhere in the story. So you can't, and then you can't get sick, and then you cannot think, and then you cannot take some, because you, my dear, are the. So the rebuild is this. I want you to look at your price and ask yourself what does this number actually carry? And if the answer is it covers my cost and I keep a little bit, you have a problem. The price is not holding the business up. You are. And so I want you to think about the price no longer just being along for the ride, but being an understanding of a load bearing price to be able to cover the cost of delivering the thing. It covers margin that allows the business to grow without you constantly funding growth on your own. And it covers the cost of your absence, meaning the team, the sub coach, or the infrastructure that means that business runs when you're not in the room. If your price doesn't do that, the problem isn't the market. The problem is not the economy, as everybody says. The problem is actually the price. The price is actually something you can fix. So who does this work for? Basically, any woman whose calendar fills before her bank account does. And any woman who does not or cannot actually name a single day that this month where the business is going to run without her. If that's, I'm curious about what your thoughts are. This is the part that nobody actually talks. This is the last lever, and this is the lever of the ground that you. Now, every price that you set is the foundation that the next woman, and so you're not pricing for yourself anymore. You're pricing for the woman who comes out, the one who will look at your business and basically say, wow, I want to be that person. That looks amazing. That's the one who I want to grow up. Okay. The one who'll think if she charges this, maybe I could charge that. And the one who will maybe round down from your number because you rounded down from somebody else. And I want you to think about the ways that when you undercharge, you're setting a legacy of not only just hurting your own margins, but also setting a ceiling for everybody else's in your orbit. Your audience mirrors the ceiling that you set, and your clients mirror the ceiling that you set as well. The women who look up to you, the women who you mentor, the women who watch your content and think, I want to build something. They're going to inherit your numbers in some capacity, and your numbers are going to become their ceiling. And I've learned this the hard way because, you know, transparently, I had a ex-boyfriend, a life, who would just like charge $100,000, $250,000 and never had any sort of hesitation. And I would sit in the other room and listen to his price point negotiations and his own. And he didn't care that he had margins of 50. He just cared that he was able to push the envelope to the next level. And, you know, it was really interesting. And when he got burnt out, the narrative wasn't that he couldn't handle it. The narrative wasn't that he wasn't cut out for it. The narrative was that he needed more of a team. And that was never about the price being wrong. It was never about the foundation being wrong. And the structure that we operate was never actually built to hold a woman who also wanted a life. And so here's the question, because I don't have a stay-at-home wife myself who cooks dinner and cleans the house and does other things that most other male entrepreneurs have in their back pocket, I suppose. And if you are not that person, I want you to ask yourself, what would you want your daughter to charge? What number is it that you would want your daughter to charge? And that is a question that cuts through all of the noise for me. So if you already know what needs to change, stop waiting for the permission, because there is no man on a white horse that's going to just show up and be like, I'll save you. And we know this. But every woman who has ever thought, I'll raise my prices when I'm bigger, and then got bigger and still didn't raise them. Every woman who tells her clients to value themselves when she charges less than what she's worth, that's you, my dear. And it needs to change. Revenue genuinely is vanity, and profit is an actual metric. And the women who keep the money are not colder, they're not harder, they're not less generous. As a matter of fact, they oftentimes are a lot more generous than most other people, but they set the terms. So they build the prices. They build the business without having them hold up everything in the middle. So I want you to think about this. One shift this week, look at your price, not the one that you tell people, the one that you first thought before you started rounding down.